So that was a huge success story. Obviously, $5 million across 5 years. I think their system was about $70,000. So that ROI is tremendous.
Hello, and welcome to Mornings with Joel, commercial real estate podcast, where we focus on rising stars and established players in commercial real estate and talk to them about how they are building legacies in today's marketplace. Hello, welcome everyone to the Mornings with Joel CRE podcast. We are excited as ever to be back with you today. We're happy that you're here, and we wanted to introduce our special guest today that we're having, Nadav Schnall with ProSentry, and we're very excited to have him. Nadav, how you doing today, man? What's going on? How you feel?
I'm doing great. Thank you so much for having me. Even better now that we got up and going. So I'm excited for today. Thanks very much for having me.
So it's all good. Yep, absolutely. So just so you know, ProSentry is well, you know what? I'm not going to tell what ProSentry is. Nadav, why don't you tell us who ProSentry is, your role there, and a little bit about the company, and then we'll try to delve into some reasons why you feel this is necessary in the marketplace or
Sure.
valuable in the marketplace.
Sure. Happy to share. So first of all, just a little bit about myself. I bet in my background right now, I am serving as the CEO and co-founder together with my business partner, John, of ProSentry. Company's been around for quite a few years now. We primarily focus on risk mitigation in real estate. That may be a big word right now, but I'm happy to break that down and kind of explain why that is important. My personal background is in real estate. I've worked in real estate almost my entire life. I started my career in property management in Manhattan. I did that for about 10 years, kind of operating, consulting for developers, luxury multifamily market. So, my first property that I worked on was actually the Plaza Hotel residence after they converted. And so that's kind of where I started. And then I moved on to some other positions within the real estate market, more dealing with building infrastructure and so on and so forth. So me leading into a kind of a real estate property technology company was almost a natural move.
Gotcha. And so it makes sense as to why you would be in with this type of company. But give us a little background on the company as well, the name and what it exactly does, and then we'll dive in a little bit deeper.
Yeah, so for sure. So ProSentry, really coming from a century and being proactive. It's a little bit of a play on words, right? So we want, a century, someone to look after your buildings, especially when you're not aware, when there's happening something that behind the walls maybe or concealed, right? So someone else that is proactive. And then I think that is very much what we are trying to do. I've kind of dropped the word risk mitigation before. So what does that mean for a building? So a building has a wide variety of operational risks. It could be fires, it could be different types of leaks, it could be, deteriorating, building materials. And, during my time in the real estate industry, one of the biggest issues that I was always faced with several times a year always cause a significant amount of damage, a significant amount of wasted time, expenses, insurance claims is water leaks. And so that's kind of one of our biggest sellers and one of our biggest focuses is really how do we mitigate that risk? It's not just about, saying, okay, well, we'll help you with this, we'll help you with that. Water leaks are the top three causes for insurance claims across the country. You look at almost any sector. And so when I look at that and I say, I've suffered from it so much. I'm sure any of your listeners, if we ask them and say, "Hey, have you ever suffered a leak personally, or do you know anyone who may have suffered a leak?" I'm sure the answer is going to be positive. It's just something that is so much. It's just so common, and so if there's a way out there to go out and solve that, why not do that? And so we started off with there, and we kind of moved out to a lot of different sectors. We now do water, and we do gas, and we do temperature, and we do humidity, and we do mechanical malfunctions, and radiator controls and a whole bunch of other things. But that's kind of where we started. And that's why, that is, I think, most important for real estate owners.
Yeah. Well, that's huge, from that standpoint. And it's kind of ironic. As you know, I'm based in Atlanta, and yesterday was 15 degrees here. So, water detection becomes a big deal, and I'm sure it's as cold, if not single digits up in New York. So it's definitely something that's needed.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. I mean, I can tell you that we have, we're installed not only in New York. New York is our home base, and so we have a lot of buildings in New York, but we have buildings, in different states, and obviously with this cold front that came in, I can tell you that a lot of our temperature sensors started to go off. People setting their thresholds to like, let me know if my temperature goes below, let's say 55 or 60. I want to start knowing, and in fact, a lot of those sensors did go off over the last, several days, letting owners know, hey, you may have an open window, or maybe, the heat's not on. You want to make sure that you are able to address that before you get to something like a frozen pipe that then bursts and causes you a substantial amount of damage. And so that's all very easy to solve with the technology that we're able to offer today.
Okay. All right. Yeah, that makes sense. I just had a kind of general question that came to my mind. Are you finding a greater demand in cities in the Northeast, which tend to have a lot of older structures, or is it newer buildings, or is it buildings perhaps in the Sun Belt that aren't used to the extreme cold, and now all of a sudden they're having issues because the buildings weren't built for extreme cold? I mean, where are you finding kind of the greatest degree of business coming from, volume of business?
I would say more steady state are typically the buildings that we are more focused on, but that doesn't necessarily need to mean a building that was set and built and running for the past 20 years. I would say we have anything from new buildings, which just opened, in the past year or so, and are still trying to figure out their kinks, their plumbing kinks, or, went through a winter, wasn't a bad winter, went through another one, and then that was worse. Or it could be older buildings where we have, older systems like older fan coil units, and, have leaks coming from the condensate pans. And so now those are going behind the walls, and people don't know about it until there's a substantial amount of damage. I mean, so it's really, knowing about a water leak or a temperature change or anything like that in 30 seconds instead of 3 hours really makes a huge difference to the property itself.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. All right, so it's not really geographically specific. It's all over the place.
Yeah, I mean, in New York, obviously temperature and water is a bigger thing, but if you look at Florida, which is a huge market, and humidity is a serious concern, right? You have, let's say, new buildings, right? You need to maintain. You have, I like to give this example because it's actually, quite frequent. You have new buildings that were just built with, brand new parquet floors, and it takes a couple of years, for the wood to expand and then contract and expand again and contract until everything settles in. And if you don't maintain a certain level of humidity in those, offices, apartments, whatever that may be, if you don't maintain that level, then you're going to start getting buckled floors. But if you have a very small,
Yep.
inexpensive sensor that's going to tell you, hey, you're out of your humidity range, turn on your AC, right? Keep it at a certain level, save you thousands and thousands of dollars.
Yeah, yeah. No, makes sense. So let me ask you. You know what? Why don't we do this? We're kind of at a commercial break. Let's take a 20-second pause for our sponsor, and then we will be right back.
The Impact Air 99. We asked real people, try the Impact Air 99.
Breathable, light, but protective.
Feels very comfortable wearing it. It looks cooler.
It's almost surprising how much air you can get in.
Engineered with 6 layers of nanoscreen technology that blocks over 99% of viruses and bacteria while allowing you to breathe freely and speak clearly.
My glasses are not fogging up.
I could wear this all day.
All right, Dan, we're back. So appreciate that. So you were talking about before the break about the expansion and contraction of floors. Certainly know about that. Growing up in Manhattan, we saw a lot of those older parquet floors, and we know what can happen in that regard. Obviously, it can happen anywhere, where you have wood floors like that. Let me ask you this, just from a logistics standpoint, how do you censor a whole building, in regard like that? Because every floor has its own, situation. So how do you do that? How do you take care of a building that's, 30 stories and with all these different floors
Yeah,
and monitor all this stuff?
that's an excellent question, and trying to kind of very simply explain how the system works. And so, first of all, we use as a method of communication, right? So we have our system is based on sensors. We have different types of sensors for different type of use cases. Some sensors do detect multiple things. So, for example, we have a sensor that can detect water, it can detect humidity, and it can detect temperature. So there are opportunities to do multiple types of detection with a single sensor. And that's true for many different types of detection. So what we have basically, how our system works, is we have a platform. This platform aggregates a wide variety of sensing technologies. So anything that I've mentioned, we even have rodent traps, right? There's a lot of different types of sensors or solutions that we offer. All of these sensors are aggregated under this one platform and providing the building owner with a dashboard showing them everything that they have. So they'll be able to kind of almost see, you talked about a 30-floor building. So they'll be able to see the 30-floor building and also say, okay, if we're talking about multifamily, so let's see what's happening in apartment 22B. And I can say, okay, I got 5 sensors in 22B. The temperature is this in this room, the temperature is that in the other room. We got a leak here, we got a leak there. And same thing for office space or any type of kind of family multi-office space or use. We're also in hotels, so we can do all of that. And the one point which, kind of ties into your question is how this is all done is we use we use a different technology for communication. Most traditional systems, IoT in homes and all that, we use Wi-Fi, right? It's simple. It's easy to connect. Everyone has it. Everyone's computer runs on it, their phones, et cetera, et cetera. And it's a really, really great technology, but it's only good for very short distances. And so for you to be able to deploy a system like ProSentry system in a full building and do it easily and not be that expensive, you need to find a different solution. So what we do is we use a technology called LoRaWAN. LoRaWAN stands for Long Range Wide Area Network. And it's similar to Wi-Fi in the sense that it communicates wirelessly. So there's no wires involved or anything like that. But it's different than Wi-Fi in the sense that Wi-Fi is a lot of data for very short distances. LoRaWAN is a little bit of data, but for very, very long distances. And so because most of our sensors, you don't need, a voice call or a text or anything like that from the sensors. You just want to know, is there water on the floor? Is there not water on the floor? Is the temperature high or is the temperature low? Is the humidity high or low? Is there a rodent or is there not? All these types of if there's smoking and vaping, is someone smoking in the room? Yes or no? It's very binary, right? For the most part. And so, or maybe you just want to know what number it is. So you can connect hundreds of thousands of sensors to a limited number of gateways. Gateways are like modems. And they just you put in one every, let's say, 4 to 6 floors, and it goes through brick, mortar, steel, you name it. And it's able to kind of cover the entire building. And this ecosystem of sensors then automatically connect. And then you get this beautiful dashboard and you can see everything that's going on inside your building.
Gotcha. All right. So it is a matter of putting out a lot of sensors, but it's obviously a necessary thing that has to be done in order to evaluate what's going on.
Yeah, I mean, I would say, a lot is I gave you an example of hundreds of thousands because that is the capability of the system. You would never put anywhere near that amount of sensors. You would probably have maybe a few hundred sensors if it's a really big building. If we're talking about water, because that's the point that we've kind of started off with, you would put a water sensor next to any water source. So if you're talking about an office space, let's say, so you'd put a couple of sensors maybe in the bathrooms, a couple of sensors in the kitchenettes, and a water station or something like that, right? Or if there's any risers that you want to go next to. It's a residential setting, so again, bathrooms, kitchens, common areas, but it's targeted, right? So you don't need that many. You can get away with it, maybe a few dozen in a floor, and you'll be fine.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Makes sense. So the problem moment in property management. At what point did you realize that something like ProSentry really needed to exist? I mean, you mentioned that you started working on the Plaza Hotel. That building's been around for a while, obviously, and it's gone through its reiterations. But what kind of was the mindset behind this to say, hey, you know what, this could really be of value in the marketplace?
Excellent questions. I would say 2 areas. First of all, while I sit at the head of a technology company and I'm a technology geek and I love technology from a personal perspective, that's not where I came from. I'm not a technology person. I came, I'm the person that was getting a call at 2:00 in the morning saying, hey, there's a leak coming from the X floor at this building. And now, you got to deal with it. That's kind of where I came from. So the obvious to that is, how do we solve something that is so common in an efficient and fast way to make property management more proactive, right? To give a better experience to the properties that are being managed. So that kind of is one aspect of it. The second aspect of it is procedurally from a time perspective and the cost, right? So if I now have a leak, if it's a small enough leak and under my insurance limit, right? So I maybe take care of it myself. So then I got to pay out of pocket. I got to get contractors. I got upset tenants, all that kind of stuff. And that to me was one of the worst experiences there are. Less so because of the insurance perspective, more so just because, you got to talk to your residents now or whomever that may be and say, hey, yeah, sorry, your neighbor just leaked into you and they're, obviously upset. They just finished renovations and all this kind of stuff. So there's, an emotional aspect to that. And the insurance part, so much money is going out the window. We talk to insurers all the time and we haven't really spoken about that yet on the podcast. But one of the advantages we bring is we are able to many times lower insurance costs. And the reason we can do that is because we lower the risk profile of the building. And so by doing that, there are less claims for the insurance carriers. And so they pay less. And from the building's perspective, they're going to pay less premiums because there's less claims, because your premium obviously gets determined based on, the risk that you pose, right? What is your loss run? What is your history? So by reducing that, the building is benefited, but by reducing it, the insurance carrier is benefited. And so what we were trying to do and what we're creating is this little ecosystem. So I would say, back to your original question, those are really the two things that that me and my partner, John, when we came together and put this business on its feet, those were the two main things. His background is in construction, right? So we're both real estate people. We both work, kind of boots on the ground. We both experience these things day in, day out. And so how do we solve that? And, if you look at fires, for example, maybe you know this because you've been in real estate for a while, a while ago, it wasn't, you didn't have to have, sprinklers out everywhere. You didn't have to have smoke detectors everywhere. It was certain requirements here, certain requirements there. Today you build that. No one builds buildings that are not sprinklered and don't have, fire alarms, everything. And of course that's life safety. So it's different than water leaks. But that to me, looking at that, if there's a method that you can use technology to mitigate an issue that everyone knows about, right? Then that's a good business to invest in, and that's a good solution for the real estate industry.
Yeah. No, you covered that well and gave a lot of insight there. One of the biggest things I was actually about to go to next was insurance, because that is a big, big deal, especially when you're dealing with commercial properties. And I didn't prepare you for this, so you might not have any case studies offhand. But do you have any ideas that generally what type of percentage value, your tenants are, not your tenants, but your clients are realizing from having the technology in the building?
100%. So every building is different. So it's hard to draw a line and say, if you install our system, you get X ROI, right? Or Y, or it'll help you with your NOI, in this sense. And there's different factors. But I would say that there's two main areas, and we do have case studies on our website, how we've helped, a variety of different buildings. There's a hotel and casino that in Atlantic City that their premium was going to go up $5 million across 5 years, just because they had a history of leaks due to temperature, due to a couple of other issues. And so we were brought in by our risk manager, recommended by a risk manager named Craig Barnett, MSG Consulting, and he recommended us to the building. The building considered our system, and we were able, when they went back out to the market to kind of place their own insurance, they were able to basically reduce that completely. They had a very, very minor. So that was a huge success story. Obviously, $5 million across 5 years. I think their system was about $70,000. So that ROI is tremendous. But we have plenty of others. There's a building in Manhattan. We were able to save $300,000 on insurance. In 1 year, their system cost $30,000. So that was a 10x ROI. So, and it's not the case for every, I want to be clear about that. Every building is different because they present a different risk profile to an insurance carrier. But we have plenty of success stories, and I'd be happy to share them. They're also available on our website, and we can see how we do that. We work very closely with insurance carriers and brokers in order to help and kind of map out how we can help a property. And that's true for both the building's underlying property insurance, as well as the individual, if you're talking about a residential setting, let's say, or even if it's like an office space and each individual resident or tenant has its own, homeowner's insurance policy. There are also discounts that are available there. So many times a building will enjoy discounts on their own. It could be not a discount too. It could also just be like, okay, you don't have a deductible that's high anymore, or maybe we won't, your renewal will be minimal or no increase, right? So there's different ways. So that's why it's hard for me to give you a straight line and say, hey, install ProSentry, you're going to get something X. But it's certainly there on the insurance. And then obviously, from an NOI perspective, there's a lot less repairs, a lot less time spent by staff on dealing with all this stuff. If you have a rental building, you may have to relocate tenants. There's a lot that goes into it, right? So there's a lot of different factors that can help your return on investment.
Gotcha. That sounds good. And is it like a one-time cost with a monitoring fee? Is that the model that
And it's exactly the model. Yep, that's exactly the model. So there's a one-time upfront cost for hardware, and then we move to a monitoring situation. What's included? People may ask, well, what do you give me once I purchase the hardware? What do I get? What does the monitoring entail? And so what we provide is obviously the monitoring and the continuous monitoring and the network and the data and everything that's associated with the system. The system is a completely independent system that does not rely on the building's infrastructure, other than maybe a little bit of electricity for the gateways. But the entire system is wireless. The entire system is battery operated. So all that is included. And one of the things that we provide, which I think is a huge value to our clients and is not provided by almost anyone in the industry, is live operator calls. So at 2:00 in the morning, when you're sleeping, no one's going to check their phone for an app notification or a text message to say, hey, you got a leak coming in your bathroom. You want someone to call you. You want someone to say, hey, you got a leak. Can I help? Do you want me to call someone? Do you want me to do something? Exactly. So you get all that together with the monitoring, and that's part of the service there.
Okay, gotcha. What is the biggest thing that you think folks don't give attention to with this type of service? We always think about water, but what about some of the other things that your service provides that you think people don't realize that they really should have coverage on?
Sure. So there's several other things. We talked about water, we talked about humidity, we talked about temperature, gas detection. So we work with a company called New Cosmos. They're kind of the foremost gas detection manufacturer for gas detection in New York City, for example. They passed a law called Local Law 157, which requires every single apartment owner that has a gas appliance to install a gas detector. And so we were able to do that for people who have a platform or didn't have the platform. You now have gas detection, and it complies with the code. It's Underwriter Laboratory certified and everything that you need there. We have smoke and vape detection. That was developed because one of our investors said, hey, one of the reasons that I lose tenants is because we have smoke and vape complaints, right? People are smoking weed or something or the other, and there's odors in the building. And they're not supposed to smoke, but no one admits, right? You can't see what it is, similar in hotels. And so we developed for that specific client, and obviously now it's being adopted by a lot of others, is, smoke and vape detectors. And so you can tell exactly when someone, not only the type, not only if someone's smoking, but also the type, right? Because you don't want, if you're making bacon in your kitchen, you don't want the detector to go off for that. And so that's there. We have environmental risks. We have, rodents, a whole bunch of other items. And the beauty is you don't have to get all of them once you're part of the ProSentry platform at any point if the need arises. And as we consistently add more technologies, you could always add that to your platform.
Okay. Well, that sounds good. So there's a lot of different things that people might not pay attention to, but they could. I like that idea of the smoke detection, because that's a big thing. You don't want people smoking in the units, but like you said, you don't want the bacon setting off the the same alarm. So that's a very, very good point. Yeah, there's a slew of discussion in the media as of late related to AI. Do you see AI as playing any part in this at this particular point? Are you guys there yet? Is it on the horizon? What are your thoughts on that?
It's an excellent question. And one of the things that I'm very happy to be in in the company that I am is that ultimately we are not going to be one of those companies, at least as far as I can tell right now, that is going to be replaced by AI, right? Because a lot of startup companies that, came up with this really brilliant idea, but ultimately we provide a solution that, a leak is going to happen at some point. It could be due to a human error, right? You can leave your faucet on in your bathtub, and all of a sudden you get a bunch of water come out. AI is not going to be able to detect that for you. So in that sense, AI is not, we are not in the business that is going to be replaced by AI, in my opinion. However, we can leverage AI, and we have plans to do that as far as predictive maintenance and sorts. So once we have enough data about a building, and the data is anonymized data, we don't need to know names and all that kind of stuff or phone numbers. All we need to know is just the locations of these sensors. And once we have enough data, we may be able to predict, hey, sounds like you've been with us for X amount of time, and we've now noticed that on this riser line, you're getting a lot of leaks that are coming from, I don't know, condensate lines or whatever that may be, right? And so we could use AI to start leveraging that and doing better predictive maintenance or predictive, risk mitigation around those areas.
Okay. That makes sense. We're a little bit behind our next sponsor break. Let's go ahead and take that right now. And then we'll be right back at the Mornings with Joel CRE podcast.
How do you build a company that lasts? One with a solid foundation that gets better with time, transforming the first dollar in your bank account into something more, building a product, a team, a culture, expanding to new countries, currencies, and customers, and accessing the capital you need to grow. How do you do all of that? With powerfully smooth banking that keeps you focused on bringing your vision to life.
Welcome back to the Mornings with Joel CRE podcast. We're here with Nadav Schnall talking about ProSentry and the value that they're bringing to buildings. Two other questions I really wanted to drill down with you, Nadav, is about the insurance companies. That's been one of the biggest things because insurance costs have just exploded, especially in Sunbelt regions. We know about the problems down in Texas and especially, Louisiana, those areas, it's gotten really, really crazy. Have you had challenges trying to convince insurance companies that this technology warrants a lowering of premiums? Or is that something that's just kind of fallen into place? I see your head nodding there, so go ahead and jump in.
Yeah, I mean, you've hit the nail on the head with one of our I would say our core value adds that we provide to people, and that is being recognized by insurance carriers. And that is it's a challenging process from a couple of reasons. First of all, we all know insurance companies; they're huge, and as big corporations, typically things happen slower, and it takes more time until you're introduced to the right person. And, that's one aspect of it. But more than the pace, it's really, insurance works based on data, right? They look at data, they look at loss history, and then, that's how they, work with their underwriters and kind of figure out what am I going to do? And so as a relatively new startup or relatively new company, it takes time to provide insurance companies with that level of data. There's also different types of technology out there, right? You may have, there's companies that do kind of, you talked about AI. This is less AI. It's more about predictive usage. In other words, they'll put flow meters in your piping and they'll say, oh, okay, based on your historical usage, we'll shut off the water if this or that. And that's great. That's really important. And that may be excellent for, like, let's say a single family home, right? Or a small building. But if you have a huge building, right, and usage varies all the time, or maybe someone's going to take a bath and they usually haven't taken a bath, and all it takes to cause a substantial amount of water damage is maybe just one tank from your toilet, right? And so what we needed to do is really to prove to insurance carriers and just show them data and show that our solution, that is, kind of the solution, I believe, for multifamily, multi-tenant kind of big buildings. So that is part of the process we had to go through. And we are now in discussion, I would say, with over a dozen different, household named insurance carriers. Unfortunately, I am not at liberty to share, some of these are under NDA, but I can say some. In New York, for example, we We are in the process of being vetted by certain carriers, and Chubb and Pure, they already provide premium discounts up to a certain level to buildings that have ProSentry installed in them. And so by having that recognition, that's a huge process and a lot of heavy lifting, but we were able to really, really provide value to building owners and real estate owners.
Okay, all right. Yeah, and actually mentioning a name or so is not a bad thing because they get the credit for being the first one in the water. So
True.
yeah,
That's true. That is true. And I have to give them credit where credit is due, because these companies like Chubb, they work with us from like the real beginning, right? Telling us what works for them, what's important for them, what do they pay attention to, what do they not care about, So it was very valuable for us when we designed the system to make sure we're touching on the highest risks for the insurance carriers, which are of course the highest risk for the building owners.
yeah, exactly. Yep. And I worked with Chubb in the past, so they're pretty level headed from what I found in most of the things they do. So let me ask you one last question as we kind of wrap up on the day. The I'm in development, and we look at what's the building of the future. And one thing that we certainly look at is what can we put into a building that is not going to cost us a fortune, but is going to be of high value to the tenants so that they will want to rent at this particular building and may even pay a premium to be in it. What would you say the building of tomorrow should look like, especially as it relates to risk mitigation in this regard?
Fair enough. So I'll answer that kind of in two sections. Wearing my previous company's hat role as kind of someone who consulted for developers and really helped what is going to get a tenant to rent here. So I would say very much so. Surrounding amenities is always a huge thing, and how do you really incorporate what people use on a day-to-day from a technology perspective, making it really easy for them, right? Making it, smooth experience, really making your home the place where you want to spend a lot of time at. But flipping it to risk mitigation, right? I don't necessarily know that you need to have complex technology or really advanced technology, but rather intelligent technology that will allow you to act on an issue and act quickly. We've talked a lot about ProSentry, but I think one of the beautiful things about it is our technology allows building owners and property owners to be proactive. It allows them to give residents a better experience. No resident, no tenant, whether it's an office space or whatever that may be, wants to have a leak. You can have we just moved offices in the city. The office is in beautiful condition right now. If we were leaked by another resident or tenant, so adoption of these types of technologies, which are relatively inexpensive and they're non-invasive, it's very easy to deploy them after the fact. And they provide true value to the residents because you won't have issues, right? Whether it's the example I gave you before about the smoking and the vaping, or just, not having to deal with a frozen pipe or something along those lines. I think that is where the future is simple solutions that don't require sophisticated operators, but yet give you the intelligence that allows you to operate the building in a better manner.
Well, sounds good. So it's definitely something that needs to be looked at. I was thinking along the lines of, as you mentioned, tenants that are maybe smoking weed in the units or doing other things, and you want to prevent that. At least you could get a very early detection on that and mitigate that issue.
On the spot. Within 30 seconds, you'll know exactly who that is.
Exactly. So I think that's a big plus. And one other thing that I actually pulled from your website, which I thought was important, 8.24 billion a year on annual non-weather related water damage. That's a huge number that you help mitigate. And then also you have a lot of women that are concerned about their children, not just women, obviously fathers are concerned about their children too. But mention that 3-year-old children that have developed asthma 7 times more than a child where there's not mold. So I guess there's mold detection as well with your services, right?
Yeah, I mean, we talked about humidity before. I mean, humidity, if you have high humidity, you're going to get mold. We all know that. Every bathroom you look at, once you shower enough times and you don't open it so that it ventilates, you cause mold. And there was a study that came out and showed that a 3-year-old child, I think that's what you're referencing, but a 3-year-old child that is exposed to visible mold is 7 times more likely to get asthma than a child that is not. And so for those, mothers and fathers out there that are interested, putting in, and we have a couple of different, actually, you've set me up perfectly because we've actually had a conversation about it this week. So there is another technology that is going to be added to the platform soon, which is, helps with mold detection, which in Europe is a huge issue. And same thing in the United States. So we will be able to help you relatively easy to know if you have the conditions that create mold, or may even be able to tell you if you actually have mold in your apartment. And again, all relatively inexpensive.
Yeah. No, very important. So I appreciate you sharing that. Also, how do you guys detect gas? I know that you can have a gas sensor. Every home has a carbon monoxide detector. Well, not everyone, but they should. So how are you guys going about detecting issues like that? Odorless gases.
Yeah. And so gas is methane gas, in other words, gas that you would have in your apartment, cooking gas. It typically, so first of all, we don't detect gas at the first sign of it because, when you turn on your gas top, you're going to have some gas there. You don't want detectors to go off for no reason. So there's actually, and we didn't come up with it. It's the NFPA, National Fire Prevention Association, and they came up with a standard of how that works. And so I may be a little bit technical here for a second, but essentially what they've determined is that there's what's called LEL. LEL is the lowest explosion limit. It basically means the content of gas in the air upon which a space may explode, right? And so what we detect is at a certain percentage of that LEL, a low percentage, like 5%, let's say 10%, whatever that percentage may be, before it reaches the 90 percentile and obviously the 100 percentile. So once the content of gas in the air reaches that level that is set by the detector goes off. It goes off both locally, like any carbon monoxide would, but we will also call the building and we will say, hey, you have a gas leak in apartment 22B. Let's use that apartment number again. But not only will we tell you that there's a gas leak in the apartment, we will also tell you the percentage of LEL that you have. And so as a first responder to that instance, right? I was just on a call that last week, I think it was, with a colleague who works at another company also in New York City. And he said, hey, guess what happened to me yesterday? My dog jumped on the cooktop. And when I got back to the apartment, it was completely filled with gas. And so it will tell first responders, hey, you have this level of gas in your apartment. So you should either be, oh, okay, no problem. Let me open the door, open the window, and everything's fine. Or, hey, there's a bigger issue here. We may want to call the authorities right away. Maybe we got to rush up quicker. Maybe there's someone inside, right? So that's kind of how we go about gas detection.
Okay. All right. Sounds good. Are there any detectors for homeowners as well, or do you just do commercial?
ProSentry is strictly a B2B company. That's exactly our value add. We are able to crack the code, so to speak, on how to do this in a building. There are plenty of companies that do single family homes out there. You can just Google and a lot of them will come up. A lot of them are also recognized by insurers. But our business model is really meant to, we're trying to avoid the losses, which may not actually originate in your apartment, so to speak. It may originate from, 10 floors above, but that's exactly what we're trying to solve. So we do only whole building solutions.
Gotcha. Okay. Sounds good. What would you like our audience to know in conclusion as we wrap up this wonderful show today and your expertise as it relates to risk mitigation technology here?
Well, I think, first of all, certainly if you are a property owner or a property manager or anything like that, and you suffer from any of the issues we discussed today, whether it be, water or gas or temperature or humidity, whether you're facing that issue and now also have an insurance concern, or you're just, you're trying to get better quality of life, or you're just, you've heard some of this and you're being proactive. So reach out to us. It doesn't cost anything. We'll be happy to come out to the property or at least do a Zoom call or something like that and just get on and figure out what works for your property. We're happy to give a proposal and, just talk to you and understand what your issues are and how we can solve them. So that's the biggest thing. It's easy to reach us. We can be reached at wprosentry.com. That's PROSENTRY.com. or you can also email us at info@prosentry.com.
Okay. All right. Fantastic. We'll put a link up also on our YouTube channel in order to have direct access to ProSentry. So, Nadav, we really appreciate having you here today. A lot of good information. People always want to know how they can save money. And by having this service, being able to save money on insurance costs is huge. And putting it in pre-development or having it as part of the development plan, I think is of value too. So, we certainly see a real reason to engage you early in a setup like this. So we thank you so much for that. And any final comments before we close out for today?
No, this was great. Thank you so very much for having me. It was great talking to you. You obviously have a lot of insight into real estate, so it's great. And thank you very much.
But thank you. Thank you. And to all of our audience out there today, thank you so much for being with us today. We certainly appreciate having you. Again, this is the Mornings with Joel CRE podcast. And until next week, have a great weekend. Take care, everyone. Have a great day.